What if I told you that every assumption the galaxy made about a small, blue planet in a forgotten corner of space was catastrophically wrong? What if the species they dismissed as primitive warmongers turned out to be the most terrifying force the universe had ever encountered, not because of their weapons, but because of something far more dangerous, their refusal to give up? For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council maintained peace through careful balance and diplomatic tradition. Wars were fought with honor, defeats were accepted gracefully, and everyone knew their place in the cosmic order. Then, humanity submitted their application to join the Council, and everything changed. They didn't just want to join the galaxy's political structure, they wanted to fight in the Krillian War, a conflict so brutal and hopeless that even the galaxy's greatest military minds had written it off as unwinnable. The Council laughed. How could a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel hope to succeed where the combined might of dozens of advanced civilizations had failed for decades? They were about to find out that humans don't fight wars the way the rest of the galaxy does. They don't follow the rules. They don't accept defeat. And, most terrifyingly of all, they never, ever stop. This is the story of how humanity's first galactic war became the stuff of legends, and how a species the galaxy thought they understood turned out to be something else entirely. Something that would shake the very foundations of their ordered universe and redefine what it means to wage war among the stars. Are you ready to discover why the galaxy learned to fear not humanity's weapons, but their unbreakable will? The great dome of the Galactic Council chamber stretched high above the gathered representatives, its crystalline walls shimmering with the soft blue light of 1,000 worlds. Ambassador Zektar of the Hegemony adjusted his ceremonial robes as he reviewed the day's agenda on his data tablet. Most items were routine trade disputes, border adjustments, the usual diplomatic dance that kept peace among 47 different species across the galaxy. Then, he saw the final item, and his four eyes widened in what could only be described as amusement. Application for council membership and military assistance, Sol system, species designation human, he read aloud to his aide, a young Vorthan named Klee who stood dutifully beside his chair. Klee's antennae twitched with curiosity. The bipeds from the outer rim? I thought they only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 rotations ago. Indeed, Zektar chuckled, a sound like grinding stone. And now they wish to join our ranks. More amusing still, they're specifically requesting assignment to the Krillian conflict. The aide's mandibles clicked in surprise. The Krillian War had raged for 37 standard years across the Perseus Arm, a grinding conflict between the Krillian Empire and a coalition of 12 council species. It had become a meat grinder of the worst kind, a war where victory seemed impossible and retreat meant abandoning billions of civilians to Krillian slave camps. Perhaps they don't understand what they're asking for, Klee suggested. Perhaps, Zektar agreed, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. He had been following reports about humanity for some time now, ever since their first contact teams had made their dramatic entrance into galactic society by successfully defending a civilian transport against Krillian raiders using nothing but converted cargo ships and what could only be called suicidal bravery. As the session began, Zektar watched with growing interest as species after species presented their cases, voted on trade agreements, and conducted the careful business of galactic governance. The humans would be the last item, as was traditional for new applicants. Chancellor Mordek, a towering Altarian whose silver skin reflected the chamber's lights, finally called for the human delegation to present their case. The massive doors at the chamber's base slid open with a soft hiss, and 3 figures walked through. Zektar had seen humans before, but these 3 commanded attention in a way he hadn't expected. The leader was a female of middle years, her dark hair streaked with gray, wearing a simple blue uniform that somehow managed to look both formal and practical. Her name, according to the briefing documents, was Admiral Sarah Chen, formerly of something called the United Nations Space Command. Flanking her were 2 others, a tall, pale male with calculating eyes who introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Webb, and a shorter, darker-skinned female whose nameplate read General Amara Okafor. All 3 moved with a fluid precision that spoke of military training, but there was something else in their bearing that Zektar couldn't quite identify. Honored representatives, Admiral Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems, we come before you today not just seeking membership in your council, but requesting the opportunity to prove humanity's worth as an ally in the fight against the Krillian Empire. A ripple of what sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter ran through the assembled delegates. The humans seemed not to notice. We have studied your reports on the Krillian conflict, Chen continued, activating a holographic display that showed the current war situation. We understand that conventional tactics have reached an impasse. The Krillian Empire controls 17 systems along the Perseus Arm, including the critical junction at Caldrus Prime. Your coalition forces have been unable to break their defensive lines for over a year. Chancellor Mordek leaned forward slightly. This is accurate. However, I fail to see how a species that has been space-capable for less than 2 centuries believes it can succeed where the combined wisdom of the galaxy's greatest military minds has not. Dr. Webb stepped forward, his fingers dancing over a control interface. New holographic images appeared: human spacecraft that looked nothing like the sleek, elegant designs favored by most Council species. These were blunt, angular vessels that seemed designed more for function than form. With respect, Chancellor, we believe the problem lies not in the wisdom of your military minds, but in the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic warfare, Webb said. Your tactics are based on centuries of tradition, honor codes, and established rules of engagement. The Krillians have adapted to fight within these parameters. You suggest we abandon honor in warfare? The question came from Ambassador Veltar of the Centauri Collective, her voice sharp with disapproval. We suggest you abandon the idea that honor and effectiveness are mutually exclusive, General Okafor replied smoothly. Humanity has fought wars for our entire recorded history. We've learned that the most honorable thing you can do in war is win it as quickly as possible, with the least loss of innocent life. Zektar found himself leaning forward. There was something in the way these humans spoke about warfare that was different from anything he'd heard in 3 decades of Council service. They discussed it not as a noble endeavor or a necessary evil, but as a problem to be solved. Your application materials mention several recent conflicts in your home system, Chancellor Mordek noted. The reports suggest a species unusually prone to violence, even by galactic standards. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but Zektar caught something in her eyes, a flash of what might have been pain, or perhaps regret. That's correct, Chancellor. Humanity has indeed been plagued by warfare throughout our history. But that plague has also been our teacher. We've learned things about conflict that species with more peaceful histories might not understand. Such as? The question came from Ambassador Quinn of the Ethereal Reaches, his crystalline form pulsing with curiosity. Such as the fact that in a real war, a war for survival, there are no rules that matter more than victory, Dr. Webb said quietly. The Krillians understand this. They use terror tactics, target civilians, and employ weapons your military codes consider dishonorable. You respond with traditional fleet engagements and conventional strategy. They adapt. You don't. The chamber had grown very quiet. Zektar realized that every delegate was now paying close attention to the human presentation. You're suggesting we fight dishonorably, Mordek said, and there was warning in his voice. We're suggesting you fight to win, Admiral Chen replied. There's a difference. She gestured to the display, which now showed detailed tactical assessments of recent Krillian victories. Look at the pattern. Every engagement follows the same script. Your forces approach in standard formations, broadcast surrender demands according to the Galactic War Conventions, and engage in what your military manuals call measured escalation. The Krillians respond by targeting your weakest ships first, using civilian vessels as shields, and employing chemical weapons that your codes classify as forbidden. Those weapons are forbidden for good reason, Ambassador Veltar protested. They cause unnecessary suffering. Tell that to the populations of the 17 conquered systems, General Okafor replied bluntly. Their suffering seems quite unnecessary as well. Dr. Webb manipulated the display again, showing a 3-dimensional tactical scenario. We've run computer simulations based on your fleet compositions and battle reports. In every scenario where Council forces follow traditional engagement protocols, Krillian victory is the most probable outcome. The enemy has simply adapted to fight within your rulebook. And humans would fight differently? Chancellor Mordek asked. Humans would fight to win, Admiral Chen said simply. We would identify the enemy's critical vulnerabilities, their command structure, supply lines, civilian morale, and target those vulnerabilities with every tool at our disposal. Including dishonorable ones? Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of painful experience. Chancellor, my species has a saying, war is hell. We didn't learn that from poetry or philosophy. We learned it from 10,000 years of killing each other. And, in all that time, we've learned one fundamental truth: the most dishonorable thing you can do in a war is lose it when you had the power to win. Ambassador Zektar found himself studying the humans with new interest. There was something about their bearing that reminded him of old predators, creatures that had evolved not as prey but as hunters. Most council species had evolved past their predatory phases eons ago, becoming sophisticated and civilized. These humans seemed to have kept something of their hunting nature even as they reached for the stars. "Your proposal?" Mordak asked. Admiral Chen straightened. "Grant us full council membership and assign human forces to the Krillian conflict. Give us 6 months. If we haven't significantly altered the strategic situation in humanity's favor by then, we'll withdraw and accept whatever role the council deems appropriate. And if you succeed? Then, perhaps the galaxy will have learned something about the difference between fighting with honor and fighting to win." The debate that followed was intense. Species after species rose to argue both for and against the human proposal. Some pointed to humanity's violent history as evidence they couldn't be trusted with galactic warfare. Others argued that their very inexperience might bring fresh perspectives to an impossible situation. Finally, Chancellor Mordak called for a vote. The results were closer than Zektar had expected: 24 in favor, 21 against, with 2 abstentions. By the slimmest of margins, humanity had been granted both council membership and assignment to the Krillian conflict. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Zektar approached the human delegation. "Admiral Chen," he said, offering the traditional hegemony greeting gesture. "I voted in favor of your proposal." "Thank you, Ambassador. May I ask why?" Zektar considered his words carefully. "Because in 40 years of council service, I have never heard anyone discuss warfare the way your species does. Most of us treat war as an unfortunate necessity to be conducted with as much dignity as possible. You discuss it as a problem to be solved, with winning as the only acceptable solution. Is that troubling to you?" "It should be," Zektar admitted. "But, given the current situation, I find myself curious to see what happens when predators are unleashed on the Krillians." Admiral Chen's smile was sharp. "Ambassador, you're about to find out why humanity spent 10 millennia learning how to kill things efficiently. The Krillians think they understand war because they've terrorized civilized species for 40 years. They're about to meet a species that was born in war, raised in conflict, and refined by 10,000 years of finding new ways to destroy our enemies." As Zektar watched the human delegation leave the chamber, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of diplomatic service: anticipation mixed with just a touch of fear. The council had just done something unprecedented. They had invited a predator species to join their ranks and turned them loose on their most dangerous enemy. Within hours, the first human warships would depart for the front lines of the Krillian War. Within days, the galaxy would begin to understand that they had made a terrible miscalculation about the small blue planet in the outer rim. They had assumed humans were primitive because they were new to space. They had assumed they were weak because their technology was inferior. They were about to learn that some species become dangerous not in spite of their violent history, but because of it. And humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about what happens when you give predators permission to hunt. The Krillian Empire had spent 4 decades terrorizing the civilized species of the galaxy, confident in their superiority and secure in their conquests. They had never faced an enemy that fought not for honor or territory or resources, but simply for the savage joy of proving they could win. That was about to change. The human expeditionary fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Caldrus system like a pack of hunting wolves materializing from the shadows. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UNS Indomitable, studying the tactical displays with the cold focus that had earned her command of humanity's first interstellar military operation. "Contact," reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the sensor station. "Krillian Patrol Squadron, bearing 27 Mark IV. 3 heavy cruisers and escort frigates. Standard formation," observed Colonel Martinez, the fleet's intelligence officer. "They're following predictable patterns, just like the analysis suggested." Chen nodded, watching as her own ship spread into what appeared to be a conventional attack formation. To any observer, especially Krillian ones, it would look like another doomed council assault following all the established protocols. The humans had studied 30 years of battle footage, and they knew exactly what the enemy expected. "Signal from the lead Krillian vessel, Admiral," reported the communications officer. "They're demanding we identify ourselves and submit to inspection according to the Galactic War Conventions. Respond according to protocol," Chen ordered. "Full identification, peaceful intentions, request for safe passage to establish humanitarian aid station on Caldrus 7. The response was exactly what intelligence had predicted. The Krillian commander's voice filled the bridge, translated through the universal communicator with typical arrogance. Human vessels, this is War Leader Vexkill of the Krillian Dominance Fleet. Your presence here violates our sovereignty. Submit immediately or be destroyed. Chen smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Colonel Martinez, are our special packages in position? Affirmative, Admiral. Stealth drones deployed 15 minutes ago. They're currently attached to the hulls of all 3 Krillian cruisers. Signal the fleet. Execute Pandora Protocol. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next century. The human vessels didn't respond to the Krillian ultimatum with either submission or traditional battle formations. Instead, they simply vanished. Not literally, the ships were still there, still detectable on sensors. But they had activated every stealth system, every electronic warfare suite, and every piece of sensor jamming technology the human military had developed during their long history of warfare. To the Krillians, it appeared as if the human fleet had simultaneously suffered complete systems failures. War Leader Vexkill studied his tactical displays in confusion. The human ships were still present, but his sensors could no longer track their weapons systems, their energy signatures, or their movement patterns. It was as if they had become ghosts. What is this? He snarled at his sensor technician. Some kind of surrender signal? Before the technician could respond, the stealth drones attached to his ship's hull detonated. They were small devices, barely larger than a human fist, carrying charges designed not to destroy but to disable. In perfect synchronization, they severed the primary sensor arrays, communications relays, and shield generators of all 3 Krillian cruisers. Within seconds, the patrol squadron had been rendered effectively blind and defenseless. Then, the real attack began. Human warfare doctrine, refined through millennia of conflict on a single world, operated on principles that made galactic military strategists uncomfortable. While council species fought with honor and followed established rules of engagement, humans had learned to fight with what they called overwhelming applied violence. The goal wasn't a fair fight, it was to make fighting unnecessary by demonstrating complete dominance. The human ships didn't approach in neat formations. They didn't broadcast warnings or demand surrender. They simply materialized around the crippled Krillian vessels and opened fire with every weapon they possessed. The effect was devastating. Human kinetic weapons, crude by galactic standards but frighteningly effective, tore through Krillian armor plating with brutal efficiency. Energy weapons, plasma cannons, and experimental railguns created a storm of destruction that left the enemy ships helpless in space. Within 4 minutes, the engagement was over. 2 Krillian cruisers were completely disabled, their crews evacuated to emergency pods. The third had suffered catastrophic hull breaches and was venting atmosphere. The escort frigates had surrendered immediately upon seeing their command vessels destroyed. Survivors, Admiral? Colonel Martinez asked. Of course, Chen replied. We're not barbarians, Colonel. Signal the rescue ships to begin recovery operations. I want every Krillian crew member brought aboard for processing. Processing, ma'am? Chen's smile was sharp. Intelligence gathering, Colonel. These crews are going to tell us everything they know about Krillian fleet dispositions, supply lines, and command structures. They're going to do it voluntarily, because we're going to treat them better than their own commanders ever did. This was another aspect of human warfare that galactic observers found unsettling. While most species treated prisoners with basic dignity according to established conventions, humans had elevated prisoner interrogation to an art form. They understood that information was often more valuable than territory, and they had developed sophisticated methods for extracting that information without resorting to torture or abuse. Within hours, human intelligence officers were sitting down with captured Krillian crew members in comfortable interrogation rooms aboard the fleet's hospital ships. The prisoners were fed, given medical treatment, and treated with a level of respect they had never experienced in the rigid hierarchy of their own military. We know you didn't choose this war, explained Commander Lisa Torres, the fleet's chief intelligence officer, to a captured Krillian navigation officer named Thexmar. We know your people are conscripted, poorly fed, and treated as expendable by your commanders. We're offering you an alternative. Thexmar's 4 eyes studied the human female with suspicion. What alternative? Information in exchange for sanctuary. Tell us about fleet movements, supply schedules, and command protocols. Help us end this war quickly, and we'll guarantee you safe passage to a neutral system where you can start a new life. It was a simple offer, but it struck at the heart of the Krillian military's fundamental weakness. Their empire was built on fear and oppression, with most of their military personnel serving under threat of execution for their families back home. When presented with an actual choice, cooperation leading to freedom versus loyalty to a system that viewed them as disposable, many chose cooperation. By the end of the first day, human intelligence officers had assembled detailed information about Krillian supply routes, command structures, and fleet deployments throughout the sector. More importantly, they had identified the Empire's critical vulnerability, their complete dependence on regular supply convoys to maintain their forward positions. "Admiral," reported Dr. Webb from the Intelligence Analysis Center, "we've confirmed what we suspected. The Krillian military operates on extremely tight logistics margins. They maintain their forward positions through precisely scheduled supply runs from their industrial systems. Disrupt those supply lines, and their entire forward strategy collapses." Chen studied the tactical projections on her command screen. Time frame? If we can cut their primary supply route for 2 weeks, they'll be forced to withdraw from at least 4 forward systems to maintain defensive positions elsewhere. Cut it for a month, and they'll have to abandon the entire Perseus arm offensive. Then, that's what we'll do. Colonel Martinez, I want strike plans for every supply depot, convoy route, and logistics hub in the sector. We're not going to fight their fleet, we're going to starve it. This decision marked the beginning of what military historians would later call the Ghost War, a month-long campaign that redefined galactic warfare forever. Human forces didn't engage in traditional fleet battles. Instead, they conducted what they called asymmetric operations, sudden, devastating attacks on supply convoys, logistics installations, and support infrastructure. Human ships would appear without warning at a supply depot, destroy it completely, and vanish before Krillian reinforcements could arrive. Convoys protected by heavily armed escorts would find themselves under attack from stealth drones that materialized from apparently empty space. Communications relays that had operated without incident for decades suddenly exploded without warning. The Krillians, trained to fight conventional fleet engagements against honorable enemies, found themselves facing an opponent that refused to fight fair. Human forces struck where they were least expected, hit targets that seemed militarily insignificant, and disappeared before retaliation was possible. "This isn't warfare," complained Krillian Fleet Admiral Mexstar during an emergency strategy session on his flagship. This is terrorism." His intelligence chief, a scarred veteran named Kektor, studied the latest reports with growing unease. "They're targeting our supply infrastructure exclusively, Fleet Admiral. No attacks on civilian populations, no attempts to occupy territory. It's surgically precise, and it's working." The numbers were undeniable. In 3 weeks of ghost attacks, the humans had destroyed 43 supply convoys, 17 logistics bases, and 6 major communications nodes. Krillian forces throughout the sector were running low on ammunition, fuel, and spare parts. Several forward outposts had already requested permission to withdraw to more defensible positions. "How is this possible?" Mexstar demanded. "They're one species, barely 2 centuries in space. We've conquered systems with billions of inhabitants." Kektor activated a holographic display showing human attack patterns. "They're fighting a different kind of war, Fleet Admiral. While we focus on territorial control and traditional fleet engagements, they're treating this as what their military manuals call a logistics warfare campaign. They're not trying to defeat our forces directly, they're trying to make it impossible for our forces to function. Then, we adapt. We increase convoy escorts, establish stronger defensive perimeters around supply bases. We've tried that, sir. The humans adapt faster than we do. When we strengthen convoy escorts, they attack the supply bases directly. When we fortify the bases, they hit the convoys. When we protect both, they target the manufacturing facilities that produce the supplies in the first place." Admiral Mexstar stared at the tactical display for a long moment. In 40 years of military service, he had never faced an enemy like this. The humans seemed to understand something about warfare that the Krillian Empire had never encountered, the principle that in a war between industrial societies, victory belonged to whoever could most effectively disrupt the enemy's ability to sustain their military forces. "What do our intelligence reports say about human capabilities?" he asked finally. Kektor's expression grew troubled. That's where this becomes truly concerning, Fleet Admiral. Based on intercepted communications and analysis of their attack patterns, we believe we face less than 15% of their total military capacity. What? The humans appear to be treating this entire campaign as what they call a proof-of-concept operation. They're using minimal forces to test their theories about logistics warfare against a conventional enemy. According to our intelligence analysis, they have substantial reserves that haven't entered the combat zone. Mexstar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service: genuine fear. You're telling me that everything they've accomplished so far is experimental? That's our assessment, yes. And, Fleet Admiral, there's something else. Our interrogation of captured human personnel suggests that their species has been conducting this type of warfare for most of their recorded history. What we consider revolutionary tactics, they consider basic military strategy. The Fleet Admiral studied the strategic overview one more time, seeing it now through different eyes. The humans weren't lucky amateurs who had stumbled onto effective tactics. They were experienced predators who had spent millennia learning how to efficiently destroy their enemy's ability to fight. And they were just getting started. Signal all sector commanders, Mexstar ordered quietly. I want a full strategic reassessment of our position in the Perseus Arm. And, Kektor? Yes, Fleet Admiral? Find out everything you can about human military history. Everything. I want to know what kind of species we're really fighting. As the Ghost War entered its fourth week, the balance of power in the Perseus Arm was shifting in ways that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The Krillian Empire, masters of terror and conquest for 4 decades, was learning what it meant to fight an enemy that understood war not as a tool of domination, but as a science of destruction. And humanity was just beginning to show the galaxy what 10,000 years of perfecting that science had taught them. The Krillian High Command bunker on Nexus Prime was a monument to military efficiency, carved deep into the planet's crust and protected by layers of energy shields that could withstand planetary bombardment. Supreme War Leader Kexthal stood before a massive tactical display showing the current state of the Perseus Arm campaign, and, for the first time in his 40-year military career, he was genuinely worried. Red indicators dotted the display like an infection spreading through the Empire's supply network. Each red dot represented a destroyed convoy, a sabotage depot, or a communications relay that had simply vanished overnight. In 6 weeks of human operations, the Krillian war machine had suffered more logistical damage than in the previous 3 years of fighting Council forces. Report, Kexthal commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems. Intelligence Director Vexmara approached the display, her scaled features showing the stress of weeks without adequate sleep. The situation continues to deteriorate, Supreme Leader. Human forces have expanded their operational area to include our secondary supply routes. They've destroyed the ammunition depot at Kepler Station and eliminated 3 more convoy escorts in the Vega system. Our response? Ineffective. Every time we reinforce an area, they shift their attacks elsewhere. Their ships are faster than our interceptors, their stealth technology is more advanced than our sensors, and their tactical flexibility exceeds anything in our operational manuals. Kexthal studied the tactical display with growing frustration. The humans were fighting a war that defied every principle of Krillian military doctrine. They refused to engage in decisive battles, avoided territorial occupation, and seemed more interested in destroying supply convoys than conquering planets. What about their military strength? Surely we can overwhelm them through superior numbers. Vexmara activated a new section of the display, showing estimated human fleet strength based on 6 weeks of intelligence gathering. That's our most troubling discovery, Supreme Leader. According to captured human personnel and analysis of their communication patterns, the forces we've been fighting represent approximately 12% of their total military capacity. The silence that followed was deafening. Kexthal stared at the numbers as if they might change through force of will. 12%, he asked quietly. Confirmed through multiple sources, Supreme Leader. The humans refer to this operation as a limited engagement using what they call expeditionary forces. Their home system maintains substantial reserves that have never entered the combat zone. And their industrial capacity? Unknown, but intelligence suggests it's substantial. Human prisoners speak casually about something they call total war production, but they claim their current military output represents only a fraction of their potential manufacturing capability. Kexthal turned away from the display, his mind struggling to process the implications. The Krillian Empire had built its expansion on a simple principle: overwhelming force applied against weaker opponents. They had conquered council systems because they were willing to use terror tactics and superior numbers to achieve victory. The idea of facing an opponent that might actually outproduce them was simply inconceivable. What about their strategy? What are they trying to accomplish? Vexmara highlighted a series of tactical analyses on the display. This is where human warfare becomes truly alien to our understanding. They don't appear to be fighting for territory or resources. Based on intercepted communications and prisoner interrogations, their primary goal is what they call strategic demonstration. Meaning? They're using this conflict to prove to the Galactic Council that human military methods are superior to traditional galactic warfare. Every operation is documented, analyzed, and reported back to their home system for future reference. They're treating our entire empire as a testing ground for their military theories. The Supreme War Leader felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're telling me they're using us as experimental subjects? That appears to be accurate, Supreme Leader. Human tactical communications frequently reference baseline enemy responses and effectiveness metrics. They're not just fighting us, they're studying us. Kexthal returned to the tactical display, seeing it now with different eyes. The pattern of human attacks wasn't random or opportunistic. It was systematic, designed to test different aspects of Krillian military response under various conditions. They had attacked supply convoys to test escort effectiveness, hit communications nodes to measure response time, and targeted manufacturing facilities to gauge industrial resilience. Have they shared their findings with the Council? Intelligence suggests regular reports to both human command and Council military observers. Supreme Leader, we need to consider the possibility that everything we've revealed about Krillian military doctrine is now available to all Council forces. The implications were staggering. For 40 years, the Krillian Empire had maintained its expansion through superior knowledge of enemy capabilities and limitations. They had studied Council military doctrine extensively, adapting their tactics to exploit the gaps in traditional galactic warfare. Now, suddenly, their own methods were being analyzed by an opponent that seemed to understand warfare in ways they had never encountered. Options? Kexthal asked. Limited, Supreme Leader. We can withdraw from our forward positions and consolidate our defensive perimeter around core systems. We can attempt to negotiate a ceasefire. Or, Vexmara hesitated. Or, we can escalate. Deploy our forbidden weapons, target civilian populations, attempt to force the humans into the kind of total war that traditionally favors our methods. Kexthal considered this option carefully. The Krillian Empire possessed weapons that violated every treaty in galactic law: biological agents that could sterilize entire planets, quantum bombs that could destroy star systems, and terror weapons designed specifically to break civilian morale. These were tools they had used sparingly, and always against opponents who lacked the ability to retaliate in kind. What does intelligence suggest about human response to escalation? Vexmara's expression grew deeply troubled. That's our most disturbing intelligence finding, Supreme Leader. According to intercepted communications and analysis of their military doctrine, humans actually prefer what they call unrestricted warfare. Their military manuals suggest that removing legal and moral constraints would favor human tactical advantages. Explain. Human military history appears to be largely comprised of what they call total wars, conflicts where entire populations were mobilized and any target was considered legitimate. Their industrial capacity, technological development, and tactical flexibility all seem optimized for that type of warfare. Vexmara activated a new display showing analysis of human military capabilities based on intelligence gathered from their home system. Supreme Leader, we believe human society is structured around the assumption that any major war will be a war of survival requiring complete mobilization of their civilization. Their industrial base, their population centers, their entire social structure appears designed to support what they call war economy production levels. And our capacity for that type of conflict? Inferior. Krillian society is built around conquest and expansion, not survival warfare. Our population is trained to dominate weaker opponents, not to endure extended conflict against equals. Our industrial base is designed to support occupation forces, not to outproduce a fully mobilized enemy civilization. Kexthal stared at the tactical display for a long moment, finally, understanding the true nature of the trap his empire had stumbled into. The humans hadn't joined the Galactic Council to seek protection or find their place among civilized species. They had joined to prove that they could fight and win against any opponent in the galaxy. "Contact Fleet Admiral Mexstar," he ordered. "I want a full strategic assessment from all sector commanders." "And Vexmara?" "Yes, Supreme Leader?" "Begin contingency planning for complete withdrawal from the Perseus Arm." As news of the Supreme War Leader's decision spread through the Krillian military hierarchy, the true scope of humanity's strategic victory became clear. In less than 2 months of limited operations, a species that had been space-capable for less than 2 centuries had forced one of the galaxy's most feared military powers to consider abandoning territory it had held for decades. But the humans weren't finished. Admiral Chan received authorization from Earth for the next phase of operations, what human planners called strategic expansion. If the Krillians wanted to withdraw from their forward positions, humanity would help them understand the full consequences of that decision. "Signal the fleet," Chun ordered from the bridge of the Indomitable. "Execute Operation Prometheus. I want human forces positioned to intercept every Krillian withdrawal route. If they want to retreat, they're going to pay for the privilege." Colonel Martinez studied the operational plans with something approaching awe. "Admiral, this goes beyond conventional military objectives. We're talking about potentially crippling their entire military structure." "That's exactly what we're talking about, Colonel. The Krillians have spent 40 years terrorizing civilized species because they believed no one could match their willingness to fight dirty. It's time they learned what happens when they face a species that wrote the book on fighting dirty." Dr. Webb looked up from his intelligence analysis. "Admiral, I'm receiving reports that other Council species are requesting permission to observe our operations. They want to understand how human tactics work." Chen's smile was sharp. "Denied, Doctor. This isn't a training exercise. But let them know that once we've finished with the Krillians, we'll be happy to demonstrate proper military doctrine to any species that's interested in learning." As the human fleet moved into position for the next phase of operations, observers throughout the galaxy began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A species had emerged from a backwater system and, in their first major military engagement, had fundamentally altered the balance of power that had existed for centuries. The Krillian Empire was learning what it meant to fight an opponent that understood war not as conquest or domination, but as the complete destruction of an enemy's ability to threaten you. And the rest of the galaxy was beginning to suspect that humanity's demonstration against the Krillians was just the opening act in a much larger performance. The age of traditional galactic warfare was ending. The age of human military doctrine was about to begin. And every species in the galaxy was going to have to decide which side of that equation they wanted to be on when the demonstration was complete. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives from 47 species filled the Great Chamber, their voices creating a din of confusion, concern, and barely controlled panic. Chancellor Mordek stood at the central podium, his silver skin reflecting the agitated energy of the assembled delegates as he attempted to restore order. "Representatives, please," his voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic systems. "We are here to address the situation in the Perseus Arm, not to engage in mass hysteria." Ambassador Zektar of the Hegemony rose from his seat, his 4 eyes fixed on the tactical displays showing the current state of the Krillian War. In 3 months, the strategic situation had been completely reversed. Krillian forces were in full retreat, abandoning systems they had held for decades, and human forces were pursuing them with a relentless efficiency that defied conventional military wisdom. "Chancellor, with respect, hysteria might be an appropriate response," Zektar said. "In 90 days, humanity has accomplished what our combined forces couldn't achieve in 40 years. The Krillians are abandoning the Perseus Arm entirely. That should be cause for celebration, not panic," observed Ambassador Quinn of the Ethereal Reaches. "Should it?" The question came from Ambassador Veltar of the Centauri Collective, her voice sharp with concern. "Have any of you actually studied the human tactical reports? The methods they've employed?" Chancellor Mordek activated the chamber's central display, showing a comprehensive analysis of human operations against Krillian forces. The data was staggering: supply lines severed with surgical precision, communications networks dismantled systematically, and entire fleet formations neutralized without a single major battle. "The human expeditionary force has indeed been effective," Mordek said carefully. "However, their methods raise certain questions about the future of galactic warfare." Ambassador Kreesan of the Vorthan Republic leaned forward in his seat. Questions such as whether any of our traditional military doctrines remain relevant now that humanity has demonstrated their approach. Dr. Webb's report from the human delegation had been circulated to all council members 3 days earlier. Reading it had been a sobering experience for military planners across the galaxy. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Krillians, they had done so while documenting every aspect of the campaign for future reference. "I've reviewed the human tactical analysis," said Ambassador Thexmal of the Outer Colonies. "They've identified critical vulnerabilities in standard council fleet formations, supply doctrines, and communication protocols. Vulnerabilities that presumably affect all of our militaries." Zektar accessed his data tablet, reviewing the human findings that had kept him awake for the past 3 nights. According to their analysis, galactic military doctrine is based on what they call assumption of honor, the belief that all participants in a conflict will follow established rules of engagement and limit their targeting to traditional military objectives. "Those assumptions exist for good reason," Ambassador Veltar protested. "They prevent unnecessary civilian casualties and limit the destructive scope of warfare." "Tell that to the 17 systems the Krillians conquered," Chancellor Mordek replied grimly. "The humans make a valid point. Rules of engagement only work when all parties follow them. Against an opponent like the Krillian Empire, traditional doctrine proved inadequate." The chamber fell quiet as delegates considered the implications. For centuries, galactic civilization had operated under the assumption that advanced species would naturally develop beyond the primitive barbarism of total war. The idea that peace and prosperity might actually be vulnerabilities in the face of truly determined aggression was deeply unsettling. "There's something else," Ambassador Kreesan said quietly. "I've been in communication with my government's military analysts. They've run simulations based on human tactical doctrine applied to conflicts involving our own forces. And in every scenario, traditional council military forces suffer catastrophic defeat when facing opponents employing human methodology. Not close defeats, complete annihilation." Ambassador Quinn's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. "You're suggesting that human warfare doctrine represents a fundamental threat to galactic military stability?" "I'm suggesting that human warfare doctrine works," Kreesan replied bluntly. "And that has implications none of us are prepared to consider." Chancellor Mordek gestured to the tactical display, which now showed the current disposition of human forces in the Perseus Arm. "What specific concerns do members have regarding human operations?" Ambassador Thexmal stood, his features showing the stress of sleepless nights spent reviewing intelligence reports. "Chancellor, the humans have demonstrated capabilities that suggest their initial application to join the Council was based on deliberately understated military capacity." "Explain." 3 months ago, they claimed to be seeking membership as a junior partner species requiring guidance in galactic affairs. Their performance against the Krillians suggests they may be the most militarily capable species in Council space. Zektar activated his own display, showing comparative analysis of human versus Council military capabilities based on the Perseus Arm campaign. Ambassador Thexmal is correct. Human forces have demonstrated technological sophistication, tactical flexibility, and logistical capacity that exceeds most Council militaries. Significantly. "Are you suggesting they deceived us?" Veltar asked. "I'm suggesting they allowed us to make assumptions," Zektar replied carefully. "We saw a species that had achieved faster than light travel recently and assumed they were primitive. We heard about their violent history and assumed they were unsophisticated. We evaluated their initial fleet and assumed it represented their total capacity." Chancellor Mordek studied the data for a long moment. "What do current intelligence estimates suggest about actual human military capacity?" The silence that followed was telling. Finally, Ambassador Kreesan spoke, his voice subdued. "Unknown, Chancellor. Human forces deployed against the Krillians represent what they call expeditionary strength, a small fraction of their total capacity maintained for operations away from their home system. Intelligence estimates of their full military potential range from substantial to extremely concerning." Define concerning. "Potentially greater than the combined military capacity of all Council species." The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. Representatives spoke in urgent whispers to their aides, data tablets chimed with incoming priority communications, and the careful diplomatic atmosphere dissolved into something approaching panic. Chancellor Mordek restored order with difficulty. "Representatives, speculation serves no purpose. We need confirmed intelligence, not estimates based on fear. With respect, Chancellor, Zektar interjected, fear may be the appropriate response. Have any of you considered what happens if humanity decides that council governance is as inadequate as council military doctrine? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For the first time since the council's founding, members were forced to consider the possibility that a new species might be capable of challenging not just individual members, but the entire structure of galactic civilization. They're our allies, Ambassador Quinn said, though his voice lacked conviction. They applied for membership, not conquest. Did they? Fexmal asked quietly. Or did they apply for access to our military intelligence, our supply networks, and our strategic vulnerabilities? Everything they've learned fighting the Krillians applies equally to fighting any council species. Dr. Webb's tactical analysis had been thorough, too thorough. It didn't just document how to defeat Krillian forces, it provided a comprehensive blueprint for dismantling any military organization that operated according to traditional galactic doctrine. Reading it felt like watching someone dissect your own vulnerabilities with surgical precision. What do you propose? Chancellor Mordek asked. Direct communication with human leadership, Veltar suggested. We need to understand their actual intentions regarding council governance and galactic political structure. Zektar shook his head. Respectfully, Ambassador, asking a potential threat about their threatening intentions seems unlikely to produce honest answers. Then, what? Do we treat humanity as an enemy simply because they've proven effective against our actual enemies? Before anyone could answer, the Chamber's communication system activated with an incoming priority transmission. Chancellor Mordek authorized reception, and Admiral Sarah Chen's image appeared on the central display. Chancellor, representatives, Chen said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had just achieved the impossible. I'm transmitting final tactical reports on the Perseus Arm campaign. As of this morning, the last Krillian forces have withdrawn from all contested systems. The immediate threat to council space has been eliminated. The chamber should have erupted in celebration. Instead, it remained ominously quiet. Admiral Chen, Chancellor Mordek said carefully, the Council extends its gratitude for humanity's service in this conflict. Your methods have proven highly effective. Thank you, Chancellor. However, I should mention that our mission analysis has identified certain ongoing concerns regarding galactic security that extend beyond the Krillian threat. Every representative in the chamber leaned forward. Admiral Chen's expression was professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was aware of exactly how her next words would be received. Our intelligence analysis indicates that the Krillian Empire was able to maintain its expansion for 4 decades because galactic military doctrine contains fundamental vulnerabilities that make effective resistance impossible. These vulnerabilities remain a threat to galactic stability. What do you recommend? Mordek asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Human military advisors are prepared to assist council species in updating their military doctrines to address these vulnerabilities. We believe comprehensive military reform is essential to prevent future conflicts of this type. The silence that followed was deafening. Every delegate in the chamber understood that Admiral Chen had just politely offered to revolutionize galactic military doctrine according to human specifications. It was presented as assistance, but it felt distinctly like an ultimatum. Admiral, Zektar said slowly, are you suggesting that human military methods should become the standard for all council forces? Chen's smile was sharp. I'm suggesting that effective military methods should become the standard, Ambassador. Whether those methods are human in origin is irrelevant to their effectiveness. As the transmission ended and Admiral Chen's image disappeared from the display, the representatives of the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. They had invited humanity to join their civilization and asked them to solve their most pressing military problem. Humanity had accomplished both objectives with an efficiency that was frankly terrifying. Now they were left to wonder whether they had gained a valuable ally or accidentally invited a predator into their carefully ordered galaxy. And, given humanity's demonstrated capabilities, they were beginning to suspect that the answer to that question might not be entirely up to them. 6 months after the end of the Perseus Arm campaign, Ambassador Zektar stood in his private office overlooking the diplomatic quarter of Council Central, watching the steady stream of ships arriving and departing from the orbital stations. Many of those ships now bore the distinctive angular design of human engineering, and their presence had fundamentally altered the rhythm of galactic politics. His personal communication device chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender was Admiral Sarah Chen, requesting a private meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest regarding galactic security. Zektar had been expecting this communication for weeks. He activated his response system. Admiral Chen, I would be honored to meet with you. My office is available at your convenience. The reply came within minutes. Thank you, Ambassador. I'll arrive within the hour. When Admiral Chen arrived, she was accompanied by Dr. Webb and a third human Zektar hadn't met before, a tall, pale woman introduced as Director Sarah Park from something called Human Strategic Planning Division. All three moved with the fluid confidence Zektar had come to associate with human military personnel. Admiral, Doctor, Director, Zektar said, offering the traditional hegemony greeting. Please, be comfortable. I assume this concerns the ongoing discussions about military doctrine reform? Admiral Chen settled into one of the offered seats with characteristic directness. Among other things, Ambassador. We need to discuss the future of human-council relations now that the immediate crisis has passed. Dr. Webb activated a small holographic projector, displaying a three-dimensional representation of current galactic political structure. Ambassador, we've had 6 months to observe how council governance operates in peacetime. Our analysis suggests certain inefficiencies that could prove problematic in future crises. Zektar studied the display carefully. The human analysis showed trade routes, communication networks, military installations, and political influence patterns across council space with a level of detail that was frankly alarming. What specific inefficiencies concern you? He asked. Director Park leaned forward slightly. The Council operates on consensus-building principles that work well for managing trade disputes and diplomatic negotiations. However, those same principles make rapid response to military threats nearly impossible. The Krillian situation required 40 years to resolve using traditional Council methods, Admiral Chen added. Had humanity not intervened, it might have required 40 more. Zektar felt a chill of recognition. This conversation was proceeding exactly as he had feared it might. You're suggesting that council governance is inadequate for crisis management. We're suggesting that galactic civilization requires a more responsive approach to security threats, Dr. Webb said carefully. The current system works well when everyone follows established rules. But, in a galaxy where species like the Krillians exist, following the rules can be a fatal vulnerability. Director Park manipulated the holographic display, highlighting patterns of communication delay and decision-making bottlenecks throughout council space. Ambassador, do you know how long it would take the council to authorize military action against a new threat that emerged in, say, the outer colonies? Zektar considered the question. Assuming standard diplomatic protocols, threat assessment procedures, and consensus-building requirements, perhaps 18 to 24 standard months. 22 months, according to our analysis, Park confirmed. An efficient military force could conquer 17 star systems in that time frame. What do you propose? Zektar asked, though he suspected he already knew. Admiral Chen's expression was serious. A new approach to galactic security. Human forces would serve as rapid response units for threats that require immediate action. The Council would retain full authority over long-term policy and governance, but military crises would be handled through streamlined command structures. With humanity in command of those structures. With competent leadership in command of those structures, Chen corrected. Whether that leadership is human is less important than whether it's effective. Zektar studied the three humans carefully. Their presentation was logical, well-researched, and terrifying in its implications. They were essentially proposing to become the galaxy's military hegemon while allowing the Council to maintain the illusion of civilian authority. And, if the Council declines this proposal? Dr. Webb's expression remained carefully neutral. Then, the Council will continue to operate as it always has, and, hopefully no new threats will emerge that require rapid military response. The unspoken corollary hung in the air between them. If new threats did emerge, humanity would respond according to their own judgment of galactic security needs, regardless of Council authorization. Admiral, Zektar said slowly, are you aware that this conversation sounds very much like a polite ultimatum? Chen's smile was sharp. Ambassador, are you aware that the alternative sounds very much like inevitable military conquest by the next species that decides Council space looks attractive? Director Park activated a new section of the holographic display, showing potential threat assessments for various galactic regions. Our strategic analysis has identified 14 potential military threats that could emerge in the next 50 standard years. 3 of them could pose existential threats to galactic civilization if not addressed promptly. Based on what intelligence? Based on the intelligence gathered during our operations against the Krillians, Dr. Webb replied. The Krillian Empire wasn't unique, Ambassador. They were simply the most immediate example of what happens when aggressive military powers encounter civilizations that prioritize negotiation over defense. Zektar felt the weight of implications settling around him like a heavy blanket. You're saying there are other Krillian empires out there? We're saying there are other military powers that view galactic civilization as a target rather than a partner, Admiral Chen confirmed. And, the current Council military doctrine would be even less effective against them than it was against the Krillians. The holographic display shifted again, showing projected expansion patterns for various aggressive species identified through Krillian intelligence networks. The implications were sobering. Within a century, Council space could face multiple simultaneous threats from different directions. What about our reformed military doctrine? Zektar asked. Several Council species have implemented human tactical recommendations. Director Park's expression became carefully diplomatic. Ambassador, teaching tactical improvements to species that lack the industrial capacity, technological base, and cultural flexibility to implement them effectively is limited in its usefulness. You're saying we're incapable of learning proper military doctrine. We're saying that military doctrine is more than tactics, Admiral Chen replied bluntly. Effective warfare requires industrial mobilization, technological innovation, strategic thinking, and cultural adaptations that take generations to develop. Most Council species lack the societal structures necessary to support effective military operations. Dr. Webb highlighted specific examples on the display. The Vorthan Republic has excellent individual soldiers but lacks the logistical infrastructure to support extended campaigns. The Centauri Collective has advanced technology but no experience with rapid decision-making under pressure. The Ethereal Reaches has sophisticated strategic thinking but insufficient industrial capacity to build effective fleets. And humanity has all of these capabilities. Humanity has spent 10 millennia developing these capabilities through constant warfare, Chen said simply. We didn't choose to become effective at destruction, Ambassador. We became effective at destruction because survival required it. Zektar realized he was facing the fundamental challenge that had been building since humanity first joined the Council. A species that had evolved in an environment of constant conflict would necessarily develop capabilities that peaceful species could never match. And, once such a species achieved technological parity, the balance of power would shift dramatically in their favor. So what happens now, he asked. Now we implement a new approach to galactic security, Director Park said. Council species focus on what they do best: trade, diplomacy, scientific advancement, cultural development. Humanity focuses on what we do best: eliminating threats to galactic stability. A division of labor. A practical allocation of resources, Admiral Chen agreed. Every species contributes according to their strengths rather than attempting tasks they're fundamentally unsuited for. Dr. Webb manipulated the display one final time, showing projected galactic development under the proposed security arrangement. Trade routes expanded, scientific advancement accelerated, and territorial boundaries stabilized as military threats were eliminated before they could develop into major conflicts. It's an attractive vision, Zektar admitted. But, it requires the Council to trust humanity with unprecedented authority over galactic military affairs. Ambassador, Admiral Chen said quietly, the Council already trusts humanity with that authority. We demonstrated during the Krillian conflict that we have both the capability and the restraint to use military force responsibly. The question isn't whether you trust us, it's whether you trust anyone else to do the job as effectively. As the meeting concluded and the human delegation prepared to leave, Zektar found himself grappling with an uncomfortable realization. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through force or deception. They had simply offered to solve problems that no one else could solve, and made themselves indispensable in the process. Admiral, he said as Chen reached the door, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if the Council rejected your proposal? Chen paused, her hand on the door control. Hypothetically, Ambassador, galactic civilization would continue to operate according to current methods until the next major crisis emerged. At that point, humanity would respond according to our own assessment of the threat level, regardless of Council authorization. Because you consider yourselves responsible for galactic security? Because we're the only species in the galaxy capable of ensuring galactic security, Chen replied simply. That's not arrogance, Ambassador. That's just tactical reality. As the door closed behind the human delegation, Zektar stood alone in his office, staring out at the orbital traffic that now included substantial human military presence. The galaxy had changed irrevocably in the span of a single year. Humanity had arrived as supplicants seeking membership in galactic civilization, and somehow transformed themselves into the guarantors of that civilization's survival. The most unsettling part was that they were probably right. The Council's response to the Krillian threat had been inadequate by any objective measure. Human methods had proven dramatically more effective. And, if other threats existed, which intelligence suggested they did, traditional diplomatic solutions would be equally inadequate. Within hours, Zektar would transmit his recommendation to the hegemony government. Within days, similar recommendations would flow from council representatives across the galaxy. Within weeks, the Galactic Council would face the most important vote in its history, whether to formally acknowledge humanity as the galaxy's military hegemon, or to maintain the fiction that they had any other viable choice. As he began drafting his report, Zektar reflected on the irony of the situation. The galaxy had achieved peace not through wisdom or diplomacy, but by accidentally inviting predators to join their civilization and discovering that some predators were more interested in protecting their territory than expanding it. The age of traditional galactic politics was ending. The age of human hegemony was about to begin. And everyone in the galaxy was going to have to adapt to the reality that sometimes, the most peaceful solution was to give the most dangerous species in the galaxy exactly what they asked for. Because in the end, humanity had asked for only one thing: the authority to do what they were already capable of doing. And refusing that request would simply mean they would do it anyway, but without the comforting illusion that the rest of the galaxy had any say in the matter. The galaxy had been shaken to its core, just as the title promised. And now it would have to live with the consequences of what that shaking had revealed.